All right. Live from coast to coast, New Jersey, all the way to California, the Puckleheads are back in action again. An emergency session that was discussed over a frantic phone call in between Marcus's lunch hours at work yesterday. We had to put this together on the eve, less than almost about 90 minutes plus here on the East Coast until 12 a.m. and the free agent market officially opens. But Marcus, yesterday, as you titled it in our little hangout here, maybe the craziest transaction day in I said U.S. history, in National Hockey League history, blowing up all over the place, overwhelming. We're going to break it down all this evening in our little chat here. Marcus, how are you, first off, most importantly?
Doing very well. Still reeling from arguably the craziest 30 minutes in NHL history. I'm sure we'll touch on, I was at work. I saw the first deal go down. I texted you. I saw the second deal go down, and I had to call you immediately because we saw two of the most lopsided trades we've ever seen and probably ever will see in the same day, followed by a massive game-changing extension that wasn't even newsworthy at that point because of everything else that had happened.
It was
so I think
story, yeah.
I think we should go transaction by transaction, deal by deal, and break it down that way. Sound good?
Absolutely works for me. So that means we'll start in order here with the first major trade of the day. I thought was one of the worst trades I've ever seen until maybe the one that followed it later in the day. Taylor Hall getting traded from Edmonton to, which I read a great article about. It was a joke article, how they must have been confused at the wrong Larson. They get Adam Larson from the New Jersey Devils. Maybe they thought it was Oliver Ekman-Larsson of Phoenix, which would have made a little bit more sense. A 1-for-1 deal, no salary retained in either place. As a Ranger fan, I'm sitting here scratching my head and just want to cry and curl up in a little ball. As someone a little bit outside of this trade, Marcus, what are your thoughts on it going into it?
So I've read a little bit about it, but I don't want to go into that. That's clarified it. I'm just going to go with what I first thought when I saw it. When I saw that Adam Larson was the return for Taylor Hall, I thought there has to be more pieces coming. But as you noted, it was a 1-for-1. It was tweeted out that it was a 1-for-1, and we were all sitting there, I think, with the same reaction you and I, like, really? That's all they got for Taylor Hall? It came out before that Shattenkirk wasn't willing to sign an extension with the Oilers, so they weren't willing to give up Taylor Hall. Apparently, Montreal had a good offer for him, or Montreal had a deal centered on Subban and Hall, but they would have wanted Draisaitl as well and the pick, driving a hard bargain at that point, as we'll touch on later, not driving a very hard bargain later on. Apparently, the Islanders had a better offer on the table. I saw that reported.
Hamonic and maybe a little bit extra, something like that. Or
probably.
It was around Hamonic, but I think the Islanders were hesitant, and then Hamonic kind of pulled back his need to go out west. So I'm not really sure what the thought process was there.
James Duthie discussed this trade, and he said that it kind of made sense would have made more sense if this happened at the draft and if there was a first-round pick involved in the top 10 with the Devils. You might be like, okay, I can see that value. You're getting two players. Still might be a little one-sided, but this reeks of a panic move to me from the Edmonton Oilers. They think that they cannot win with Taylor Hall, as James Duthie touched on today. I'll be talking about stuff he said later on that was very interesting about the other acquisition that happened. It seems like Edmonton thinks that their future was brighter without him. I think Adam Larson is a fine defenseman. I think he's a great top four defenseman, and he has room to improve. But Edmonton needed a top pairing guy. They needed help on the back end, but they really needed a top pairing guy. And Larson doesn't provide that for them. I think he'll make a nice pairing with Andre Sekera. If they sign Jason Demers tomorrow, as is rumored, that back end will look a lot nicer. But you're downgrading, and this is not to hate on Milan Lucic, who is a very effective player, but you're downgrading on a player who is going to be signed for longer than Taylor Hall and for probably more money. That doesn't really – I don't think Lucic really fits their style.
No, it doesn't make sense there at all.
I think they want to play an open game, especially with Todd McClellan. I know McClellan he's done well with bigger players, but it's very confusing to me. This reeks of them kind of selling low and just saying, you know what, we need a defenseman, we have to do it. Down goes Brown. Sean McIndoe made the great analogy that basically, the Oilers were trying to get their breaks fixed, and they were refusing to pay anything more than market value. It's 3 years later, and they're like, all right, now I have to splurge a little bit. I have to give up more than I wanted to fix my breaks.
Yeah.
The problem is I don't think Adam Larson fixes their breaks in this instance. I think he's a good player. I think he'll have a good future there, and it'll work. But this would have made more sense for Nail Yakupov or Jordan Eberle or both.
Yeah, the funny thing is we've talked about, going back as far as 18 months about a Larson Yakupov, how that kind of made it a nice switch. You're getting rid of a guy in Taylor Hall who's has had a very solid NHL career, and he's only 24 years old. I mean, the guy is still a young guy. I'm bringing up his stats right now so I don't mess him up. I mean, as a 19-year-old, he scored 42 points, 53-50. Then he had 80 points in 13-14. He was hurt in 14-15, so only had 34 points. But then back up to 65 points. In today's NHL, that's a first-line left wing right there. I mean, he's arguably the third best left wing in the NHL, behind, I guess you could consider, if you want to consider Malkin a left wing or not, or a guy like James Neal or Jamie Benn even, or something like that. He's right up there as one of the top echelon scoring forwards in the league. Absolute panic button move after they Oilers tried to go after Kevin Shattenkirk, but he did not want to initially sign an extension with them. So that was clearly they go from Kevin Shattenkirk all the way down to Adam Larson, who, I've had the privilege of seeing Adam Larson. I do think he's I think he's got a bright future ahead of him. A solid top four pairing defenseman throughout his career. That's what he's going to be. He's going to be a good skater. I think at his peak, he could probably put up 30 points on the back end, I think, on a good team playing some power play minutes. But to get rid of a guy like Taylor Hall, who's on a great contract, 4 more years at $6 million, which is a great price for a guy who's scoring 65 to 80 points a season, it just makes no sense to me. And what even infuriates me more is they talked about PK Subban, how they couldn't derive a deal with PK Subban and Taylor Hall. That would have at least made so much more sense. And we'll get into Montreal later in the show, but it would have at least made more sense from a Edmonton Oilers standpoint, Marcus. It has panic written all over it. Peter Chiarelli now has traded the first and second overall picks in the 2010 draft. He traded Tyler Seguin a few years back in Boston. Now Taylor Hall, number 1 in that draft. Panic written all over it. Does Adam Larson help their blue line? Of course it does. But in reality, I think the team just took a step back.
I do too.
They probably, next to Connor McDavid, got rid of their best offensive player for a top 4, maybe their best offensive player right now, because McDavid's only 18, 19. Why this wasn't done around somebody else, I don't know. I thought a Yakupov, maybe Yakupov and a second or a third for Larson and like a draft pick. Maybe a couple mid-tier prospects if you wanted to add a little bit more to it. Panic. The Devils come up with a steal. They get the best goal scorer they've had since Kovalchuk left. And now he's under a great contract. And hell, if they are able to put together a decent team, and now the Devils are taking some steps up the ladder with Corey Schneider back in net, they still need some work in the back end. Hell, maybe Taylor Hall re-signs with them in 4 years once this contract's up. Maybe I'd say another 2 or 3 years, the Devils are going to start turning that corner, and that's when Taylor Hall is going to be looking for that contract. And maybe he sees that. Panic written all over it. It just made no sense whatsoever to me for the Edmonton Oilers, and this is going to blow up in their faces. And if Peter Chiarelli is not in the hot seat, I know he's somewhat recently hired. I mean, this trade just made no sense. And honestly, until I saw the trade later, I thought it couldn't get worse.
The very concerning thing about this deal is that Leon Draisaitl spent a lot of his time with Taylor Hall. With Taylor Hall, posted great numbers. They had a great chemistry. Without him, and admittedly, this is a sample size of smaller than 25 games, but he wasn't even a point per every 4 games player. And that can't be overstated. This is a lineup that, as much as they've been lauded for their offense, a Taylor Hall doesn't grow on trees.
No.
If you're going to get rid of a Taylor Hall, as important as centers are and as important as defensemen are, Taylor Hall is worth a better defenseman than Adam Larson. Now, there are rumors that they've tried, and with Subban, I think what where it's going to come back to is that the league does not value Subban as highly as we think they do, as we'll touch on when we talk about that trade in a little bit for a variety of reasons. The two trades that happened would have made more sense if Weber was traded for Adam Larson and if Subban was traded for Taylor Hall. Those trades I could have seen make sense. Would have questioned it from the Devils' perspective, trading Adam Larson for Shea Weber. Would have thought that Nashville went from having a good defense to a great defense. Similar to how I think about Subban, but not at the same level.
Yeah, sure.
But I think we're seeing similar trends of it's in today's NHL, as progressive as it is, that the league does not value skill as much as it should or as highly as we think they do. I just don't know how you watch. Well, maybe it is how you watch that final, because James Duthie made a great point on TSN today. He said maybe Edmonton looks at Pittsburgh and sees they have incredible center depth and that the wingers didn't really matter and that they had a good mobile back end. But I really don't think that back end is the model to try and model yourself after, because as we've talked about, I mean, Pittsburgh had Letang, but they got a good series out of Justin Schultz, and Trevor Daley was great before he got hurt. But
yeah, exactly.
That back end was not great. It was their forward depth, and just they played a style that made sense. I don't know if, having watched a Todd McClellan coach team, the Sharks never played as fast as they did last year under Todd McClellan. I really just question this in all fronts. But I think the biggest takeaway from this and the Subban deal is that certain players that we value as, I'll say it, as fans and media, that we think should be valued just aren't. And it's a strange disconnect, and one that I didn't think I'd see. You mentioned that Chiarelli's now traded the top 2 picks. He also traded Phil Kessel away.
Yeah.
When Kessel was in an early prime. He was lucky he got Tyler Seguin out of that deal. Didn't get nearly as much for Seguin as he got for Kessel, and didn't get as much for Taylor Hall as he got for Tyler Seguin. It's dumbfounding. I thought this was the most one-sided trade in NHL history. A lot of people still think Chiarelli had the worst day of any GM in the NHL yesterday, but I think it's time to get into it. What I think is the single worst trade in NHL history, and what will go down as a trade that set back the Habs as long as that Patrick Waugh deal did, is the swap for PK Subban and Shea Weber. Now, Shea Weber, I'm going to paraphrase my thing by saying I think he's a great defenseman. He scores goals at an elite level. However, I would not put him in the top 10. I might not put him in the top 20 either. Conall, I know you were talking about a list. I'm not sure if you have it.
I got a list.
He's got the list. He's going to break it out.
Shea
Weber is maybe the definition of an eye test guy. You look at him, he's big, he skates well. But maybe I'm just following the wrong eye test. In recent years, he's not the same Shea Weber we saw in 2010. Weber in 2010 was maybe the best defenseman in the league. There's a reason he was nominated for the Norris Trophy this year. And it's funny to me when media members, as a side note, cite the Norris Trophy, Weber, in the voting as if this is some reason he's better than Subban. This is an award you vote on, like that you decided. Of course you're going to say that, oh, this is a reason he's better. 2010, he was one of the best. 2014, I'm not so sure. We've seen with Suter and Yossi, they've both posted better possession numbers without Shea Weber. That's not to say he's not an asset. That's not to say he doesn't play a physical game. But this is a guy who has the puck in his own end when he's on the ice more often than you think a player of his caliber should. PK Subban is not that. PK Subban, even though he was instructed by his coach, as I read in a great piece by Andrew Berkshire today, instructed by his coach to dump the puck out of the zone, had better zone exit numbers than Shea Weber did. Brings the puck. PK Subban is what you look for in a modern defenseman. He is good as Erik Karlsson, in my opinion. I think the difference between the two of them is razor thin.
It's minute. To me, those are the top two.
And Subban just didn't carry a bad team as well as Karlsson did. I think that's what it comes down to. But this is a trade that makes no sense to me on so many levels. This is a fascinating trade for a lot of reasons. Bomani Jones is not a hockey guy, but he touched on this in his show today that this is potentially the most interesting story in professional sports right now, because you have probably the most popular athlete in the city of Montreal, beloved by his city, traded. You know, he made the point. He made this great point. Have we ever had an NHLer who you're like, that's a cool guy? Who's the NHL's Joe Namath? Can you name someone like that?
I mean, I'm trying to think.
Like Yager, maybe, but like.
I mean, like back in the day, I know Bobby Hull was kind of a charismatic guy, but even he was sort of boring. What's the guy? The guy from Boston, they had the 30 for 30 on. I just blanked on his name.
Yeah.
Derek Sanderson.
Yeah.
That was like maybe the original, but I mean, hockey has traditionally been, to quote the writers, the good old Canadian boys sport,
exactly.
where it's like these. I mean, even the star of the NHL and other Pucklehead Cole Zimmerman, if he was here, maybe would defend him. But Sidney Crosby is boring as looking paint dry. As maybe one of the great top 10 players, maybe ever, by the time his career finishes. He's that talented. Yet he is so boring. In his interviews, it's ridiculous. PK Subban is everything you want in a 21st century athlete.
Yeah.
He's charismatic. He's well-spoken. He's a world class in his sport. As we just talked about, he is in the top 5, top 10 conversation for me. If I was building a team right now, he'd be one of my top picks. I mean, he is that good. He's good looking. He dresses well. He is, most importantly of all this, a terrific human being, donated $10 million to a children's hospital in Montreal. He should be the poster boy, as we've discussed, of every NHL ad possible. Get him in Gatorade and Powerade. For the World Cup of Hockey, he should be, a prominent player on that roster, yet he's left off originally. I mean, I don't know, maybe he'll wind up there. Who knows? I mean, he should be built. Every team in the league would dream of a guy like PK Subban. And now he's going to Nashville, where I think he will thrive. Yes. I think they will fall in love with him. He's going to put out a country album, and I'm going to buy it from him. I mean, he's going to be great. He's going to be so much fun. And most importantly, PK Subban is one of those few guys in a sport that is very team-oriented and where individual talent is sometimes minimalized. He is one of the few guys I would pay good money just to watch play. And there's not many guys in the league right now that I would necessarily say that about. He's right up there.
And I think ultimately, and that's why this trade makes no sense. We'll touch on, I started to touch on it. I'll let you build on it too. But I really think that the reason this trade happened is because the NHL, and to a lesser extent, this is why the Hall trade happened. The NHL establishment, like guys like Michel Therrien, Marc Bergevin, these old-time hockey guys. You see it with some of the younger GMs and Yzerman, David Poile, who makes this trade.
Oh, God.
Even with him.
He wins GM every year already.
But there's a push for uniformity. As Bomani Jones said, the NFL is considered the most uniform workplace in the world, and the NHL is more about uniformity than that. And you have a guy who is confident, he's brash, he takes chances. Sometimes that comes back.
Sometimes, listen, I love it, man.
Ultimately, and I don't think this is conscious, and I'm not saying that everyone in the city of Montreal is a racist. I think race comes into play here. You look at hockey, you see guys, a ton of guys who look alike. White, good old Canadian boys. Yeah. PK Subban is not that. I think that scared Montreal. Like, read their quotes about this trade. Oh, Shea brings leadership. He's a hard worker.
Shea Weber doesn't speak.
Yeah,
he's another boring guy. He's like Sidney Crosby. He's a boring. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's why this world is so beautiful in some ways, that there's room for every person to be their own person, and that's great. But it just. We can go on their personalities too, but then you get into the finances and it makes even less sense.
It makes very little sense, but I realize now more than ever that the hockey establishment values a certain type of player more than they value another type. And this is not even getting into race, but I think PK Subban is very much, I don't want to say disruptive, but he's a guy who speaks his mind. He's if a coach, I think he's the kind of guy who, if a coach said something bad, he'd say, "Coach, come on, what are you thinking here?" I think I don't know what I'm trying to say trying to get at is I've never felt more like there's a reason they said all these hockey articles coming out about him. Conall, I texted you some of those quotes that are just insane coming from GMs who think Montreal won this trade. My phone is dead, so I unfortunately can't pull them up.
Yeah, I got a few of them here. I'll read it for you.
So, but what I'm saying is in that same article, they mentioned that Shea Weber is like a part of the Team Canada, quote unquote, like leadership group, like the brain trust. He's a strong but silent leader. Why isn't PK Subban a player who is better at his position than Shea Weber? Why isn't he a lock for Team Canada, but Shea Weber is? And I think it's just this interesting mix of race, of just the way hockey is, and Subban challenges a lot of those things, and ultimately I think that's what got him traded more than his on-ice play. Because if you're looking at on-ice, this is a lopsided trade, and that's not even getting into the pure finances of the trade.
I think as we move into a more progressive world, and you could bring this into it. I mean, you look at the 21st century sports; it's the same way in a lot of sports. Look at baseball right now, and how these old school guys are. First off, some of them against technology, which makes no sense to me. If you're going to have a replay, you might as well use it. And then look at and he's a Mets killer. That hasn't been this year. Like a guy like Bryce Harper, who is flamboyant, outspoken, frankly arrogant at times.
Yeah.
But similar, I think a very similar comparison to a PK Subban. Maybe PK Subban is not quite at the level that Bryce Harper has been as far as statistically, but
close.
But close. I mean, for as far as PK playing defense, these guys, you have these old school mindsets that this is a workplace. There should be none of this. I'm like, at the end of the day, these guys are getting paid millions of dollars to play a game that every kid in their backyards dreams. What happens? There's you're not, if you hit game 7 of the, you hit a home run in the World Series, you're not going to be, in the backyard. You're not going to be like, oh, and they win. Yeah, you're going to lose your mind. You're going to be a little kid.
You're not trotting around the bases and just shaking everyone's hand.
Exactly. PK Subban, guys like, people who fall in love with a guy like PK Subban or a guy like Brett Favre or any of those guys who play with their hearts on their sleeves, you fall in love with them because they realize, this is a game. This is, at the end of the day, there are going to be bigger things in life. But they understand the fact that he knows how privileged he is, and that's why he's giving back. Oh, it blows my mind. And you got a guy like Michel Therrien, who is boring, who is old school. He was benching Subban during the season for no reason. Like you said, he was preaching for him to dump the puck out, which is the complete wrong mindset for any young hockey player out there. Please never listen to a coach if he says that to you. I'm telling you right now. It's frustrating, and frankly, I'm glad he's out of the Eastern Conference. I mean, it's for me. I'm happy. This is great because this is going to hurt Montreal. But to me, it honestly makes me a little bit angry because of the mindset. Because I think the mindset of NHL GMs and brash clearly don't get it. And I tweeted out yesterday during the Larson and Hall trade that this is why I think I could run an NHL team starting tomorrow. And then I quoted my own tweet after the next trade, and I said my point exactly. And I believe that. And I think this is a point that just because someone necessarily is in a position of power doesn't necessarily mean they know what they're doing.
Exactly.
And I think hopefully for younger GMs, when you look at Phoenix hiring the 26-year-old guy and Nashville and these guys who have younger mindsets and are starting to understand this, hopefully we move away from this. But I agree. I think race plays into this. I think flamboyant, God forbid someone's outspoken, which is the worst part, which we always talk about is the NHL media or sports media in general. They just want boring quotes, as we joke about the hockey players, pucks deep, battling for the boys, 4 lines. But, if someone says, what, we played like, crap tonight and, we weren't good enough and, I'm upset about this and I'm upset about that, but we can fix this if we work towards this. If someone said something like that, like PK Subban is a guy who would say something like that, God forbid someone spoke their mind. It's amazing.
And God forbid PK Subban.
Yeah, exactly. In a world in the U.S. and Canada where we're pro-democracy and we're pro-capitalism, our U.S. sports leagues seem to have almost socialistic or communist background to them because it's like they want these players to be robots. They want them all to be the same. They want them to just keep their mouths shut and do their job. I'm like, guess what? Your job is to hit a ball. Your job is to hit a puck, whatever it is. Guess what? You're allowed to have fun. I mean, it's life at the end of the day. Honestly, and I hope you guys can see that if you're watching this. I was frankly upset by this trade because I knew because the background that came from this, I know exactly why they got traded, which is complete malarkey to me.
And you're seeing these quotes from NHL GMs, and I'm calling you, and I text you in bewilderment yesterday. Some of these quotes that these executives wrote in that think that not only is Shea Weber a better player now, but because they don't have PK Subban and because of the leadership that Shea Weber is going to bring to the team, that Montreal is going to be better. Like I've been in locker rooms where a bad presence leaves and the team plays better, they play looser. I get it. I don't in my right mind see how PK Subban can be that presence. I don't. And then the almost universal praise of this deal on behalf of Montreal and the backlash received by people who, frankly, probably watch as much hockey as some of these executives that are covering it. I don't understand. I don't understand. The disconnect makes no sense to me. Like, I thought everybody knew and appreciated PK Subban, but I guess I should have seen this coming once he was left off of Team Canada.
Frustrating. It really is. I got a few of the quotes here. I'll read just a few of them. I got a few. Craig Houston, who is the author, talked about winning now and winning big, and you do that with a player like Shea Weber. If you're the Canadiens GM, Mark Bergevin, you have to know what you're doing, the risk down the line, but that's only, that's four or 5 years down the line, apparently.
As if PK Subban's a prospect.
Yeah, it's as if they just traded a 20-year, as if you just traded like a 20-year-old. When you talk coaches and general managers, Weber is considered the guy they'd build around right now. Still the better player, Eastern Conference coach. Still the better player right now is Weber. Wrong. The better player in 2 years is Subban. Subban's been the better player for the past 2 years.
At least.
Weber is the bona fide number one defense, franchise guy, blah, blah, blah. Long-term deal, this is a win by Nashville. Short-term, this is a win by Montreal. It's a win by Nashville. Short-term, long-term, back to the future, whatever you want to say. It's a win.
I just didn't understand. Like I had to read the tweet that Custins tweeted about, spoke to execs who think this is a win for Montreal. And I saw some snarky tweet response of like, no, wait, didn't he say that Montreal loses this trade? I had to read the tweet again to make sure. Oh, no, he said that Montreal won the trade. Let's talk the finances now because.
Oh, yeah, let me bring up, I got the general manager stuff just to back up to make sure we're correct here.
Shea Weber is signed for the next 9 years, I want to say. Shea
Weber as 30 years old at a 7.857 cap space, okay? Even a little bit more in real dollars, is signed through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 through 25, 26. So what is that? 9 years?
9 more seasons.
9 more seasons, 10 more seasons, 9 more seasons. Yeah. Yeah.
He is signed for nearly a decade.
At 30 years old, on the back end, like we said, Shea Weber is still a good defenseman.
Yeah.
But now let's look at what the Nashville Predators just received in return. Were the Predators? Let me just.
And thinking about these long-term deals, other than Mariot Hossa, which of these decade-long deals?
They're all just debacles.
Other than Hossa, which one has worked? Because I'm still waiting.
Yep. And then PK Subban, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more years, 27 years old, $9 million cap hit. But I mean, for that, frankly, is the elite defenseman, I think, next to Erik Karlsson in the league. So I think it's worth it at that percentage. You look at what the top 4 now for Nashville is. Ryan Ellis signed for 3 more years at 2.5, 25 years old.
He's your number 3 or your number 4.
Matthias Ekholm signed until the same as Subban, another 6 years at 3.75, 26 years old.
So that's your second pairing. Okay.
Roman Josi, and maybe one of the best contracts in the NHL at 26 years old, has 4 more years at $4 million. And then PK Subban at 27, $9 million a year for another 6 more years.
See, if you're Nashville, you have these guys signed to cheap enough, long enough deals. Paying Subban $9 million doesn't kill you. Like, that's a fine. You're like, okay, we can do that. That's just, you would have been spending $13 million ideally on Josi and Subban together. You're doing it the same way, except Subban's making 9 and Yossi's making 4. what a steal. And then they are going to be – that power play, as much as we give James Neal guff, but, he's a elite power play player. They're going to have Johansson. They're going to have Forsberg. They're going to have Yossi, and they're going to have Subban on their top power play unit. This is a team that is a Stanley Cup contender right now. I'd say arguably the favorite.
I agree. I think they're a move or two away from being solidified there. I mean, they still got 9.3 in cap space. They got already Philip Forsberg. They got Neil, Mike Fisher, Craig Smith on a nice little contract, Ryan Johansson, Colin Wilson, Mike Ribeiro, and then some younger guys, Cody Bass, and some younger guys they're hoping to come up. I think as we talked in our freeze and preview there, that they're going to be a team in play. I think a depth move or two for them. I think, a Thomas Vanek would be a nice fit there. They're looking for a little bit more punch on the offense. Their top 4 defenseman is probably the best in the NHL. And all they really need to do is just sign, 2, 5, and 6 guys and, have a depth defenseman there who are just, don't have to be anything crazy. Be able to play 15 to 16 minutes a night. You get another depth scorer on that offense, and they are in very, very good shape.
They had probably a top 5 defensive group before.
Absolutely.
When they played the Sharks, though, I remember when the Sharks would throw out Thornton against Yossi and Weber, and knowing the numbers about Weber and then watching the series play out, I wasn't intimidated. The Sharks generated the majority of the chances when Weber was on the ice, even when he was with Roman Yossi. Now that Yossi is going to be paired with Subban, I mean, if you're just talking about the same team last year with this different move, if PK Subban's on Nashville, they probably win that series in 6 games. They took the Sharks to 7. Although they didn't win a game on the road, they played them close, even though there were some holes there. With Subban, that team probably wins the West last year.
Yeah,
the playoffs worked out.
It gives them more speed on the back end. They're younger, they're faster. I think they could add a couple more speed guys, as we talked about. I think I just mentioned Thomas Vanek, but we talked about Darren Helm or a cheap Michael Grabner. I mean, they would be so fast, that team. No one could keep up with them. That could be a lot of fun. They'd be the Pittsburgh of the West, basically. That's who they become, with a deeper back end, with a much better blue line.
Does Montreal have any hope of this deal working out in the short term for them? Are they a playoff team with Shea Weber and a healthy Carey Price and without PK Subban?
They're a healthy team. If Carey Price is healthy, he's in the class of Lundqvist, Corey Schneider, guys like that, Luongo maybe from last year, who, despite how bad their team is, he could probably get them into a first round and lose in 5 or 6 games because Carey Price is that good. That's how good of a goalie he is when he's healthy. But he is coming off a very injured-plagued season. Who knows? They're a worse team on paper now. That Andrew Shaw contract is also brutal. Makes no sense.
Doesn't make sense.
Is Andrew Shaw better than Lars Eller? I mean, he's a little bit more feisty. It's pretty much an even trade. Maybe you could say Lars Eller is better. Not a good contract. They're a weirdly put-together team. The only way they're a playoff team is if Carey Price steals some games and gets them to that last spot.
As good as Carey Price is, I look at that roster and I personally see a lottery team again. I don't think they'll be a high lottery, but I think
they're not good.
They're Ottawa basically now.
They're not good.
They're Ottawa with a better goalie and a worse defenseman.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. All right, Marcus.
The third deal.
We're gonna have a little fun here for a second.
It's Conall. So Conall was texting me yesterday, and he said, "I think I could come up with a list of 15 to 20 defensemen that are better than Shea Weber." And I said, you should do it. Like that'd be awesome. So here's his list right now. I haven't heard it.
Okay.
If I hear names that aren't on there that I think are better than
exactly.
Shea Weber,
so what I'm going to do is I got like 17 or 18 names here, a couple of question marks. I'm going to read them out to you.
Okay.
You can say yes, no, or maybe.
Okay.
And if it's a no, we can discuss it. If it's a maybe, we can discuss it. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll start with the obvious, PK Subban.
Yep. Hard yes.
We'll go with his same team, his former team in Nashville, Roman Yossi.
Yep.
Erik Karlsson.
Yep.
TJ Brody.
Yeah.
Mark Giordano.
Yep.
Oliver Ekman-Larsson.
Yeah.
Brent Burns.
Yep.
Mark-Edward Vlasic.
Yep.
Keith Yandel.
Yeah.
Chris Letang.
Yep.
Drew Doughty.
Yep.
Duncan Keith.
Yeah.
Justin Falk.
Yeah.
Victor Hedman.
Yes.
Dustin Bufflin.
Yep.
Alex Pietrangelo.
Yep.
Kevin Shattenkirk.
Yep.
I also had Anton Strawman on the list. I think you could make the argument for it.
Yep.
You probably could. And that's the list I can come up with. I could probably even look up more names. Who do you think I'm going to look up? Sorry. Yeah, Aaron Ekblad, who just signed a nice contract. I put Ekblad on the same. Yep, actually, he's there for me too.
Trying to think around it.
I mean, it's only been 1 year, but maybe the Ghost out in Philadelphia or something.
Hard for me to say no.
Not yes. I mean, I would take Ghost. I would take Ghost now because he's younger. I don't know if he's better than Shea Weber yet, but he's.
I'm trying to think team by team.
I'm looking through. I could throw out some names: Sammy Vatanen, John Carlson.
I was gonna say I think I take John Carlson over Shea Weber now.
I think I'd take John Carlson.
I don't know about Goligoski.
I don't know about Goligoski. I wouldn't take Goligoski. Dougie Hamilton.
I think I'd take him over Shea Weber too because he's younger.
There you go. Nick Leddy. I'm not sure I'd take Nick Leddy. I don't think so. Yeah, so that's just about 20 when we added a few to the list. So there you go. All guys that I think we were in agreement.
I was glad you added Vlasic.
Not yet, but he had a great year, and I think he's a future is John Klingberg in Dallas as well.
I was going to say Klingberg.
He's fantastic. He's another guy that I think I would give me another year or two of like that before I completely say yes. But I take him right now over Weber for sure. So there you go, folks. Pretty easy stuff.
The tweet that I think sums this up, and then we'll get on to the Steven Stamkos contract. PK Subban is a top 4 defenseman in the league. Shea Weber's a top 4 defenseman on a team.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's so good. I didn't hear that one.
That was Drag Like Pull. If you're not following, he's a great read, especially for advanced stats. I think that's it. I think Weber at this point I think some of his possession numbers are maybe because he's going against toughs. But, if he was in a second pair, I think he's ideally right now a second pairing defenseman, a very good second pairing defenseman.
Yeah, of course.
Don't get me wrong, but he's one of the worst first pairing defensemen in the league. And if you think there's 60 first pairing defensemen in the league, he's probably in the 50 range, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe not the 50s. We had him outside the 20s, but you're giving up stupid. If Subban was a prospect, maybe this would make sense. If this trade happened, 5 years ago when Subban was drafted,
2009, 10, or 10, 11, maybe. You know what I mean?
It would make sense, but it doesn't. And, if we had listened to the Toronto media all year, the signing of Steven Stamkos in Tampa Bay wouldn't have made any sense. But the more you think about it, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, good segue into it as we talk about, I know as we're joking, arguably the biggest UFA to potentially hit the market, and I couldn't tell you how long. I mean, probably ever. When you talk about pure free agent, not talking about trading rights. Not talking about it, expansion back in the day with WHA and whatnot. It's all different.
Mark Messier's rights getting traded to the Sharks.
That's right, for a 4th-round pick, who turned into
Ryan Callahan.
Hey, here we go. Steven Stamkos, 8 years, 8.5 cap hit per year. 26 years old, stays as the face of the franchise. Marcus, he takes a bit of a discount, but maybe in hindsight he doesn't because of the tax situation in Florida. I'm not going to say I'm surprised. I thought Tampa Bay was always going to be in the top 3 probably. I did expect him to at least get to July 1st and see what other teams had to offer. And I know there had been like this 5-day, there's like the new CBA has like this 5-day pitching period basically. Toronto had the mayor there with them. But I really did expect him to get to July 1st, maybe even July 2nd, to at least hear, probably the 29 other teams looking to make an offer to him. Were you surprised that he didn't reach there, Marcus? Because I thought at the very least I was. Yeah.
Shocked. I was shocked. I think frankly that they found the right time to kind of release it. The Lightning did. I'm guessing that deal was done probably earlier in the day, and that they knew some other stuff was going down, and they were just like, okay, we're going to slide it in now. Bye, guys. Tampa always made the most sense from a hockey perspective. They're going to be his best chance to win, even if they lose Ben Bishop, even if they have to lose Alex Killorn. Yzerman's going to do his damnedest to keep Victor Hedman and Nikita Kucherov. They already took steps today buying out Matt Carl. From a hockey perspective, they made the most sense both immediately and arguably a future sense. Toronto was no sure thing. He'd be going home. He'd be playing for Mike Babcock. In Buffalo, as good as they look down the line. That didn't really, and, he's playing with Eichel potentially on 2 separate lines. I didn't see the fit. Detroit had a lot of space. Tampa was always the one that made the most sense to me. Now, we'll touch on this, seeing which teams scored face-to-face meetings with him. I was very surprised at who did get a meeting and who didn't, as we'll talk about later. But Tampa made the most sense. Steve Yzerman looks like a hell of a GM right now. He waited out Druin. He had faith that Druin was going to get his chance and play in the NHL. As much as you and I didn't blame Druin for wanting to be traded and wanting a shot and, maybe not being as patient, Yzerman knew that Druin was going to get his shot in the playoffs, and Druin proved himself. And now he's got Druin, and now he's got Stamkos, and they're loaded. If they're fully healthy, I know they took Pittsburgh to 7 games, and I know Pittsburgh lost Trevor Daley, but Tampa Bay without a full-strength Stamkos is very different than Pittsburgh without Trevor Daley. Very different.
It's a different scenario, and we had talked.
They took that team to 7 games.
Yeah, absolutely. We had talked about
and without Ben Bishop.
I know. Well, we can make the argument that they were playing with their better goalie, I guess.
We could make that argument.
We were talking about during the year and into the playoffs. Without Stamkos, is he going to leave? If he leaves, we talked about in 14-15 how Tampa Bay could be dominating for years to come, and then we're like, oh, maybe not. But I think they're right back on track there. I think it's interesting. This deal, it makes sense from every standpoint. Good for Steven Stamkos. If he's happy, that's all that matters in the long run. They have just under $13 million in cap space now. They still have to sign Alex Killorn, Nemesnikov, Kucherov, and then, Druin and Tyler Johnson and Palat are all free agents next year, RFAs next year. I think this deal even signals to me more that Ben Bishop is going to get moved sooner rather than later. Yeah. It would just make sense that way, just in case you want to risk losing one of those players up front. You trade Ben Bishop. You're able to sign up all your RFAs. You can maybe improve your team, with some more depth moves here down the line. And then you sign, a veteran goaltender to be your backup there. Vasilevsky.
Or you rely on the Latvian kid.
Oh yeah, he was good for them too.
Gillespie's good.
I'd say Gillespie's. Yeah, he was good too. So you could really do that. I think Tampa has a lot of flexibility. They have draft picks. They have good contracts, probably with the exception of my boy Ryan Callahan, but he's a Saint, so no, it doesn't matter anyway.
The good thing about Druin too is that I think he could make one of those forwards that they might lose expendable. I don't think you want to lose. Yeah. You don't want to lose the triplets, but if it's Killorn or Nemesnikov and you have Jonathan Druin there already, that stings a lot less.
I don't think it's out of the realm to sign a guy like Killorn to like a 3-year deal. And then either trade him or just leave him open for the expansion draft next year.
Yeah.
Just keep him, try to be, it's kind of cheap to do that and not necessarily the nicest thing in the world, but it's a business at the end of the day. Basically be like, oh, yeah, here's a 3-year contract. And then all of a sudden kind of like, all right, leave him open for the Las Vegas, Aces or whatever they'll be called to just snag them down the line. So I think Tampa's in great shape. Great contract for them. And something that I think is I don't know necessarily lost in this deal, but something to think about. Marcus, does this help or hurt the rest of the free agent class? Does Steven Stamkos taking $8.5 million help Kyle Okposo, or does that hurt him?
I think I think I see where you're coming from the cap hit.
Yeah.
I think maybe money goes down a little bit, but there's a lot of teams
Heck of a lot more suitors.
A lot more suitors, a lot of teams who have space, and a lot of teams who are going to spend. The 3 teams that have a ton of space and that everyone assumed were going to be Stamkos contenders: Detroit, Buffalo. Toronto doesn't have a ton, but you still got to think they might try and go after a big fish. I don't think this hurts Kyle Okposo. I don't think this hurts, David Backes, those kind of guys. I think this helps just because there's more flexibility there. Because frankly, if Stamkos had left, that would have taken 2 destinations off the market because Tampa Bay wasn't going to spend on a big name free agent if they weren't going to sign Stamkos. And whoever signed him. So I think this helps. Speaking of the teams that we thought were going to meet with him, everyone was talking about, Montreal got a meeting with him. Toronto did. Buffalo did. right? Was it Montreal, Toronto, Buffalo? There was
Montreal,
one more.
Toronto, I think Detroit was in there, I believe.
Detroit did not get a meeting. Did you read Elliot Friedman today?
No, well, I know what you're going to. I know the Sharks were like the surprise team, right?
Had a meeting with Steven Stamkos, and according to Elliot Friedman, he says and thinks it was the San Jose Sharks. Doug Wilson will never confirm this, but I kind of want to get into that because I think that signals something to me that I hadn't thought about. And I know this isn't a Sharks podcast, but to me, that I wrote about it this morning on Fear the Fin. This is a team that stayed away from July 1st. That to me is news that they were able to secure a meeting with Steven Stamkos just to get a meeting and get to pitch him. I know he stayed in Tampa Bay, but that because you have Thornton and Marleau coming out off the books at the end of this year, do you think San Jose can be a player in free agency these next couple of years? Or do you think this is just, you know what, they're a contender, they're well run, Stamkos is a 1 in a million player, and this was a 1 in a million opportunity? Because I'm curious to think what the sense around the league is about it.
Well, I think once you lose guys like Thornton and Marleau, whether it comes down to them being retired or what they decide to do down the stretch here, I think why wouldn't they? They would have so much money to play around with. They'd have the cap is hopefully going to continue to climb, maybe in future years a little bit more. That's nearly what, 13 million or so off the books there in the next couple of years with Marleau and Thornton. I think it's good on the Sharks. I think this playoff run was fantastic for them. Hopefully put them on the map a little bit more. And I think, frankly, they're in a great location. I mean, the Bay Area is a lovely place. And I mean, you grew up there and I visited, and I said if there's one place in California I'd move to, it'd be the Bay Area because I didn't like Los Angeles that much. And now I hate them even more because of the Kings. But, I think it's a great area. They seem, this year was a little, last year they weren't as good. So what happens? Fans don't go as much. And it's definitely a non-traditional market. They've had success for 20 years basically now. Finally get to a cup. I think why not? From my standpoint, it would make sense. Now, whether they go back to being a bit more of a budget team compared to a cap team, who knows? And it could be right that, this is Stamkos. Why not at least give him a call, right? I mean, listen, see what you could do, see what he says, blah, blah, blah. But good on the Sharks for getting involved. I think they deserve that, right? And I think the respect from the cup run at least, had Stamkos thinking. And I think that's something that should be a credit to the San Jose Sharks and Doug Wilson, who's done, for the most part, a fantastic job there. And frankly, as I said, if I was a player, I think that'd be a very enticing place to go. A great area, and seems like a good organization.
And I think it was a unique chance too because Stamkos has experience in a non-traditional market, so maybe he's more open to going to a place that isn't a traditional hotbed. So maybe that won't help them with the next 2 years. But, I see the next 2 years, the big free agents, Jamie Benn has played in Dallas. John Tavares has played in Long Island. Places you wouldn't necessarily consider these, maybe more Long Island, but not necessarily Dallas, these traditional hotbeds. It's interesting. I think it was a newsworthy tidbit. I don't think it translates this year because I don't think they'd be willing to spend on another guy like that. We made our predictions last week about where we think these guys are going to go. Do you see this, creating any other sort of kind of a domino effect now that Stamkos is signed? Like, are we going to see a really bad contract given out now? Because
easily. That's the first thing I thought of when the contract was off the book. Someone's going to panic and do something like that. It's going to be a situation. It's going to be an interesting situation as we see the guys like Okposo or something like that. And Okposo's a good player, but is he worth $7 million? Which, so maybe someone panics and gives to him. We'll see what happens down the line. But I think good on Steven Stamkos and good for him for staying with that organization. If that's what makes you happy, definitely was shocked seeing him not go there. But I gotta say, and the funniest thing to me is that Steven Stamkos just signed, and that was one of the last things we're gonna wind up talking about. So that's the funny part there.
Yeah. It's going to be a fun couple days these next few days. Unfortunately, I have to take off, so this is the end of our emergency podcast.
Session.
But we'll be back. We'll be back next week talking more about where some of these players have gone and trying to cope with the doldrums that is the the NHL offseason. Until next time, I'm Marcus. He's Conall. Thanks for watching.
Happy 4th, guys.
USA.